The wind didn't just blow in the Northern Territory. It screamed. It was a jagged, icy blade that cut through my thin ceremonial shift, slicing deep into my skin. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute frost spreading through my chest. I stood in the center of the lunar square, my bare feet sinking into the slushy, gray snow. Thousands of eyes were pinned on me, some filled with pity, but most brimming with the kind of bored cruelty you'd show a dying animal on the side of the road. In our pack, the ironclaw power was the only currency. And Maya Vance, was bankrupt. I was an Omega, born to a bloodline that had lost its glory 3 generations ago. I was the girl who scrubbed the floors of the Great Hall, the girl who kept her head down, the girl who had spent 10 years secretly loving the boy who was destined to be mine.
Garrett.
He stood 5 feet away from me, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the entire pack. He was the pride of the Ironclaw, the lead warrior, the man every young wolf wanted to be. For years I had felt the pull, that golden thread of fate that hummed beneath my skin whenever he walked past. I had waited for this night, the night of the red moon, when our bond would finally be made official. I had imagined him taking my hand. I had imagined finally being seen. Maya Vance. Garrett's voice didn't tremble. It was hard like the granite of the mountains. He didn't look at me like a mate. He looked at me like a stain he was finally about to wash away. Garrett Stone, lead warrior of the Ironclaw, stand before the moon goddess and my pack, he shouted, his voice carrying to the very back of the square. The silence that followed was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs, begging for him to stop, begging for the thread not to snap. I recognized the bond, Garrett continued, his lip curling in disgust. And I reject it. I reject Maya Vance as my mate. I reject her weak blood. I reject her useless wolf. She is a shadow on my path to the council, and I will not be tethered to a failure. The thread didn't just snap. It shattered. The pain was physical. It felt like someone had reached into my chest, grabbed my soul, and twisted it until it turned to ash. I let out a sound, a broken, wet gasp, and fell to my knees. The snow was freezing, but my blood felt like boiling lead. Garrett. I whispered, my voice cracking. I looked up, searching his eyes for a shred of the boy I used to pick berries with. There was nothing. He didn't even look down. Instead, he reached out and grabbed the hand of the woman standing beside him. Sienna. She was the daughter of a council elder, a high alpha with a wolf that roared like a landslide. She looked at me and smirked, a slow, predatory baring of teeth. A warrior needs a queen, Garrett. The pack alpha boomed from the high stage. Not a servant. Your rejection is recorded. Maya Vance, you are now unclaimed. You are nothing. You are lower than the dirt beneath our boots. Leave the square. You are no longer welcome at the feast. The pack erupted into cheers. Laughter followed me as I stumbled to my feet. I didn't have a coat. I didn't have shoes. I had nothing but the rags on my back and a hole in my heart where my mate used to be. I turned and ran. I ran past the jeering warriors, past the women who had whispered about me for years, and straight into the dark, forbidden woods that bordered our land. Let the frost take me, I thought, tears freezing on my cheeks. Let the monsters find me. Anything is better than the silence of a rejected soul. I didn't know that someone was watching from the shadows of the ancient pines. Someone whose power made the Ironclaw look like barking puppies. Someone who had been waiting for the Ironclaw to make a mistake. And Garrett Stone had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Before we move on to the rest of the story, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below where you are watching from, and tell me how the weather is there today. Is it as cold as the Northern Territory, or are you enjoying some sun? The woods felt different tonight. Usually, the forest was a place of rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a twig, but tonight, the silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that felt like a weight pressing against my eardrums. I had been walking for hours. My feet were numb, the skin likely shredded by the jagged rocks and frozen brambles, but I couldn't feel them. My nervous system was fried. Every few minutes, a fresh wave of rejection would hit me, a phantom pain where the bond used to be, and I would have to lean against a tree to keep from collapsing. He rejected me. The words looped in my head like a funeral dirge. He rejected me for a political alliance. He rejected me for status. I reached a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal the Black River. This was the boundary. On this side lay the Ironclaw territory, my home, or what used to be my home. On the other side lay the Deadlands. It was a strip of no man's land that separated us from the Shadow Wing pack. The Shadow Wing were the stuff of nightmares. They didn't follow the council. They didn't participate in the trade agreements. They were ruled by a man known only as the Alpha King, a rival so powerful and so ruthless that even our Alpha didn't dare say his name aloud. They called him the King of Scars. I stood at the edge of the water, looking at the dark reflection of the moon. I was a traitor just by standing here. If the Ironclaw patrols found me, they would kill me for being so close to the border. Maybe they should, I whispered to the wind. That would be a waste of a perfectly good soul. The voice didn't come from behind me. It seemed to come from the shadows themselves. It was deep, resonant, and carried a vibration that made the very marrow in my bones hum. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. At first, I saw nothing but the towering pines. Then, the shadows shifted. A man stepped into the moonlight. He was massive, taller than Garrett, broader than our Alpha. He moved with a predatory grace that made my wolf, which had been whimpering in a corner of my mind, suddenly go dead silent. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awe. He was dressed in dark furs and tactical gear that looked like it had seen 100 battles. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his face was a map of war. A thin, silver scar ran from his temple down to his jaw, but it didn't make him ugly. It made him look like a god who had survived hell. But it was his eyes that trapped me. They weren't brown or blue. They were a burning, molten gold. "You're a long way from the feast, little Omega," he said. He didn't move toward me, but I felt his presence like a physical heat. "I'm not. I don't belong at the feast," I managed to say, my voice trembling.
"Who are you?"
"Are you a scout?" The man tilted his head, his golden eyes scanning me from my frozen hair down to my bleeding feet. His expression hardened, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury crossing his features for a split second before it was masked by a cold, calm exterior. "I am the man who hears the screams of the rejected," he said softly. He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, my heels touching the icy water of the river. I felt the bond snap from 5 miles away. A warrior's rejection. A coward's choice. My breath hitched. "You felt it. Only an Alpha of a certain caliber feels the death of a fated bond in his woods," he replied. He reached out a hand. His fingers were long, his knuckles scarred. "Come away from the water, Maya. You're turning blue." He knew my name. Panic flared in my chest. "How do you know who I am?"
"Stay back."
I'll howl. "The patrols." "The patrols are drunk on ale and celebrating your mate's new alliance," he interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. "They won't come for you. They've already forgotten you exist." The truth of his words hurt more than the cold. I looked back at the lights of the Ironclaw village in the distance. He was right. Nobody was coming for me. I was a ghost to them. I looked back at the stranger. "Who are you?" He stepped fully into my space. The scent of him hit me then, sandalwood, rain, and something metallic, like unsheathed steel. It was a king's scent. It was the scent of the rival. "My name is Silas Vane," he whispered. My blood turned to ice. Silas Vane, the Alpha King, the King of Scars, the man my pack had spent a century trying to destroy. "You I gasped, trying to scramble away, but my numb feet gave out. I braced for the fall into the river, but it never came. Strong, warm arms caught me. He pulled me against his chest, and for the first time in my life, the cold vanished. It was like being pressed against a furnace. "I am the enemy of your pack, Maya," Silas said, his voice rumbling against my ear. "But I am not your enemy. Your mate threw away a diamond because he thought it was a pebble. I don't make the same mistakes." He lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. I should have fought him. I should have struggled. But as he turned toward the deadlands, toward the territory of the monsters, I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. I felt safe. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my eyes fluttering shut as the warmth of his body began to lull me into a daze. Silas Vane looked down at me, his golden eyes burning with a possessive fire that made my heart restart with a violent thud. "I am taking you home," he said. "And tomorrow, the Ironclaw will realize that when they rejected you, they declared war on me." I wanted to ask more, but the darkness finally claimed me. As I drifted off, I felt him press a kiss to my frozen forehead. "Sleep, little wolf," he whispered. "The world that broke you is about to burn." The transition from the frozen nightmare of the woods to the interior of Silas Vane's stronghold was like waking up in a different world. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain or the fear, it was the heat. A massive stone fireplace dominated the room, the logs hissing and spitting as they threw orange light across walls of dark, polished mahogany. I wasn't on the ground. I was buried in furs so thick and soft they felt like clouds. My feet, which had been shredded and blue, were now wrapped in clean, white bandages that smelled of lavender and medicinal herbs. "You're awake." I bolted upright, wincing as the movement pulled at the raw ache in my chest. Silas was sitting in a high-backed leather chair near the fire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had stripped off his tactical gear, and now wore a simple black shirt that strained against the muscles of his chest. In the firelight, the scar on his face looked like a silver thread woven into his skin. "Where am I?" I whispered, my voice sounding like gravel. "The Citadel," Silas said, standing up. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace that commanded the air in the room. "The heart of the Shadow Wing territory. You've been asleep for 14 hours. 14 hours? I scrambled to the edge of the bed, panic rising. "I have to go back. If I'm missing, the Ironclaw will think I've defected. They'll what, Maya?" Silas was suddenly there, standing at the foot of the bed. He didn't look angry, but his presence was so immense it felt like he was closing in on me without moving an inch. "Will they hunt you down? Will they drag you back to scrub their floors while Garrett Stone knots his soul to another woman? Will they punish you for the crime of being thrown away?" I flinched as if he'd slapped me. The memory of the rejection flashed through my mind, Garrett's cold eyes, the pack's laughter, the snapping of the bond. I looked down at my bandaged feet. "I'm an Omega.
I'm nobody.
If I stay here, I'm a traitor." In their eyes, "You were a traitor the moment your bloodline failed to produce a warrior," Silas said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He stepped closer, reaching out to tilt my chin up with one finger. His touch was electric, a searing heat that made my breath hitch. "But in my eyes, you are the most valuable thing that has ever crossed that river." "Why?" I breathed, searching his molten gold eyes. "Why me? You're the Alpha King. You could have anyone. Why bring a broken, rejected girl into your home?" Silas leaned down, his face inches from mine. The scent of him, rain and steel, filled my senses, making my head swim. "Because the moon doesn't make mistakes, Maya. Your bond with Garrett didn't snap because you were weak. It snapped because it was a lie, a shadow meant to keep you in place until the true light found you." He moved his hand from my chin to my neck, his thumb grazing the spot where a mate's mark should have been. My skin burned under his touch. I felt you, he whispered. For years, I felt a pull toward the border. A resonance I couldn't explain. Last night, when he rejected you, the wall between us didn't just break, it vanished. You aren't a refugee, Maya. You are my mate. The room seemed to tilt.
No.
That's impossible. You're the enemy. Garrett was my fated mate, the thread was there. An echo, Silas countered, his eyes burning with a possessive intensity that terrified and exhilarated me. He was a test of your loyalty. I am the reward for your survival. The ironclaw laws say an unclaimed female is a pariah. My law says she is a queen. Before I could respond, a heavy knock sounded on the door. A tall woman with gray-streaked hair and the sharp eyes of a hawk stepped in. She wore a dark uniform and carried a tray of food. Sire, she said, bowing her head slightly. The council is gathered. They've heard rumors of the girl. They are demanding to know why a Northern Omega is in the king's private chambers. Silas didn't take his eyes off me. Let them demand. Tell them the king has found his crown. Bring the girls something decent to wear. We are going to the Great Hall. Silas, wait, I said, grabbing his forearm as he turned to leave. The heat of his skin was staggering. I can't go out there. Your people, they'll hate me. I'm the enemy. Silas covered my hand with his grip firm and protective. My people respect power, Maya, and they will learn to fear the woman I choose to protect. You spent your life being invisible. Today, that ends. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. Dress well, little wolf. We're about to show the world what happens when a king claims what a boy was too foolish to keep. An hour later, I stood before a full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The servant had brought me a gown of deep crimson silk that clung to my curves like a second skin. It was sleeveless, exposing the pale, unmarked skin of my shoulders and neck. She had brushed my hair until it shone like mahogany and placed a simple, heavy silver cuff on my wrist, the mark of the shadow wing. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. But inside, I was trembling. The doors to the great hall swung open, and the roar of 1,000 voices died instantly. The Shadow Wing pack was nothing like the Ironclaw. Where my pack was loud and chaotic, this pack was disciplined, silent, and terrifying. They stood in rows, their eyes tracking me with predatory curiosity. Silas stood at the far end of the hall, seated on a throne carved from obsidian. He looked every bit the Alpha King, deadly, ancient, and absolute. As I walked down the long stone aisle, the silence was so thick I could hear the rustle of my silk dress. Every eye was a judge. Every breath was a challenge. I reached the foot of the throne and stopped. Silas rose, his golden eyes locked on mine. He stepped down the dais, his cape of black wolf fur trailing behind him. Pack of the Shadow Wing. Silas's voice boomed, vibrating through the stone floor and into my very soul. You ask why this woman stands among us. You see a girl from the north. You see an Omega. He reached out, taking my hand and pulling me up onto the dais beside him. He didn't just hold my hand. He interlaced our fingers, a public declaration of equality. I see my mate, Silas roared. I see the woman whose soul was forged in the same fire as mine. The Ironclaw rejected her. They called her nothing. Today, I call her your queen. Does any man here wish to challenge my claim? A low growl rippled through the hall, not of aggression, but of submission. One by one, the warriors of the Shadow Wing dropped to one knee. The sound of their knees hitting the stone echoed like thunder. Maya Vance, Silas said, turning to me, his voice now a private whisper that made my heart race. You are no longer the girl who hides. You are the woman who leads. Do you accept this pack? Do you accept me? I looked out at the sea of kneeling warriors, then back at the man who had pulled me from the frozen river. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like destiny. I accept, I said, my voice clear and strong. Silas smiled, a slow, dangerous smirk that promised retribution for every tear I'd ever shed. He turned back to the hall, his eyes turning cold. Good. Because Garrett Stone is at the border gates. He has come to demand his property back. It's time we show him that Maya Vance doesn't belong to a boy anymore. My blood ran hot. Garrett was here. He had come for me, not out of love, but out of pride. Let him in, I said, stepping forward beside Silas. I want him to see what he threw away. Silas's growl was a sound of pure, dark pride. That's my queen. The iron gates of the citadel groaned as they were forced open, the sound echoing through the valley like a dying beast. I stood on the high stone balcony overlooking the courtyard, Silas's hand resting heavily and possessively on the small of my back. Below us, the Shadow Wing warriors formed a wall of black steel, their eyes fixed on the small party of ironclaw riders entering the arena. At the head of the group was Garrett. He looked out of place here. In our home territory, his silver and blue armor made him look like a hero. Here, against the dark, jagged obsidian of the Alpha King's fortress, he looked small,
Petty.
His horse shifted nervously, sensing the overwhelming predator energy that saturated the air. When Garrett looked up and saw me, his face underwent a transformation. First shock, he clearly hadn't expected me to be alive, let alone dressed in royal crimson. Then, his eyes narrowed into that familiar, condescending glare I had endured for years. But when his gaze shifted to Silas standing over me, the blood drained from his lips. Maya, Garrett's voice shouted, amplified by his alpha spark, though it lacked the weight of the man standing beside me. Get down here now. You've caused enough of a scandal. To flee to the deadlands is one thing, but to stand with the enemy? You are shaming the stone name. I felt a low, vibrating growl start deep in Silas's chest. The air around us began to hum with the Alpha King's power, a scent of ozone and sharpening blades. I reached out, laying my hand on Silas's forearm to steady him. I wanted to handle this. I stepped to the edge of the stone railing. The stone name? I called back, my voice remarkably steady. I don't carry that name, Garrett. You made sure of that in the Lunar Square. Or did you forget your own decrees so quickly? Garrett winced, his horse dancing beneath him. I was making a point about pack hierarchy. The rejection was a formal necessity, but you are still a member of the Ironclaw. You are a pack property. Our Alpha has realized that letting an Omega, even a defective one, fall into the hands of Silas Vane is a security risk. You're coming home for questioning. Questioning. Silas spoke for the first time, his voice a landslide of authority that silenced the entire courtyard. He didn't shout, yet every person present felt the words in their teeth. You refer to my mate as defective and property in my own house, boy. Garrett squared his shoulders, trying to summon his warrior pride. She isn't your mate, Vane. She's a Northern Omega. We found the thread years ago. She's mine by right of destiny, even if I chose not to claim her. Your bond is a delusion or a dark magic trick. Hand her over, and we can avoid a border skirmish. Silas took a slow, deliberate step forward, his golden eyes glowing with a terrifying light. You threw her into the snow to die. You broke the thread yourself. In the eyes of the moon goddess, you murdered the bond. And in the vacuum you left behind, the true path opened. Silas turned to me, his expression softening just enough for only me to see. Then he looked back at Garrett. Maya, tell him. Tell this boy who you belong to. I looked down at Garrett. I thought about the years I had spent skipping meals to make sure his armor was polished. I thought about the nights I had sat outside his window while he entertained other women, just to be near the pull of the bond. I thought about the cold, lonely girl in the snow. I am not property, Garrett, I said, my voice cold and hard. And I am certainly not yours. You rejected the girl who loved you. But the woman who stands here, she wouldn't touch you if you were the last wolf on earth. I have been claimed by a king. My loyalty, my heart, and my wolf belong to the Shadow Wing. Garrett's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He drew his sword, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. It's treason, then. You're a traitor to your blood, Maya. And you, Vane, you're a thief. I challenge you. By the laws of the North, I challenge you for the return of my property. The Shadow Wing warriors let out a collective, dark laugh. Silas didn't even reach for a weapon. He simply looked down at the lead warrior with pity. You challenge me? Silas asked softly. You think this is a duel in a training circle? You are in the Kingdom of Shadows now, little warrior. We don't play by your rules. Silas raised a hand, and suddenly, dozens of Shadow Wing archers appeared on the ramparts, their bows drawn, black-feathered arrows aimed directly at Garrett's heart. Go back to your alpha, Silas commanded. Tell him that Maya is no longer a daughter of the North. She is the High Luna of the Shadow Wing. Tell him that if a single Ironclaw scout crosses the Black River, I won't just kill them. I will march on your village and erase the stone name from history. You wouldn't dare, Garrett hissed, though he looked at the arrows with mounting fear. The council would never allow a full-scale war over an Omega. Try me, Silas whispered. The power he released in that moment was so vast it forced Garrett's horse to its knees. The lead warrior scrambled to stay in the saddle, his pride finally shattering into panic. He looked at me one last time, not with love, but with a terrifying, vengeful hatred. This isn't over, Maya, Garrett spat. If I can't have you as a mate, I'll see you executed as a traitor. Enjoy your king while you can. The North is coming for you both. He yanked his horse's head around and galloped out of the gates, his men following in a cloud of dust and shame. As the gates slammed shut, the tension in my shoulders finally broke. I leaned against the stone wall, my heart hammering. I felt Silas move behind me, his large, warm hands coming to rest on my shoulders. He pulled me back against his chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Are you okay? He murmured, his breath hot against my skin. He won't stop, Silas, I said, turning in his arms. He's obsessed with his status. Losing me to you, it's the ultimate humiliation for him. He'll convince the council to go to war. Silas cupped my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. Let them come. I've spent my life fighting for a throne I didn't want. Now I have something worth protecting. I've waited 100 years for a woman with your spirit, Maya. I won't let a boy with a shiny sword take you away. He leaned down, his lips ghosting over mine. But he was right about one thing. What? I asked, breathless. The bond isn't complete, Silas whispered, his eyes darkening to a deep, burnt orange. He rejected you, but I haven't officially marked you. The pack needs to see it. I need to feel it. I want the world to know you are mine beyond any doubt. My wolf stirred, let out a long, haunting howl of agreement. I looked at the man who had saved me, the man who saw me when I was invisible. Then mark me, Silas, I whispered. Claim me. Make it so I never have to look back again. Silas didn't need to be told twice. He gathered me into his arms and carried me toward the royal chambers, his growl echoing through the hall, a promise of a love that would either save us both or burn the world to the ground. The royal bedchamber was a sanctuary of shadows and moonlight. Silas set me down gently on the edge of the bed, but he didn't pull away. He stayed close, his presence a heavy, intoxicating weight that made the air feel thick. I could hear the steady thrum of his heart, a deep, rhythmic drum that seemed to sync with my own. Are you sure, Maya? Silas whispered, his forehead resting against mine. Once I mark you, there is no going back. The Shadow Wing will be your life. My enemies will be your enemies. You will be bound to this throne as much as you are bound to me. I reached up, my fingers trembling as I traced the silver scar on his jaw. I've spent my whole life being bound to people who didn't want me, Silas. For the first time, I want to be bound to someone who does. I don't want a way back. I want a way forward. A low, primal sound erupted from his throat, a mixture of a groan and a growl. He shifted, his hands sliding into my hair to tilt my head back. His eyes were no longer gold. They were a molten, glowing amber that pulsed with the light of his inner wolf. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin of my neck, right over the pulsing vein of my throat. I gasped, my back arching as a jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot through my body. It wasn't just physical desire. It was the call of the bond, the ancient magic that Garrett had tried to ignore. You are mine, Silas rumbled against my skin. In this life and the next. Every breath you take belongs to me. Every beat of your heart is my rhythm. I felt his teeth graze my skin, a sharp, exhilarating warning. I gripped his shoulders, my nails digging into the soft cotton of his shirt. Do it, I breathed. He bit down. The world exploded. It wasn't just pain. It was a flood of light and color that filled my mind. I saw images of the Shadow Wing's history, the battles fought in the snow, the ancient kings who had ruled before him. I felt Silas's strength, his loneliness, and the fierce, protective love he already held for me. It was like a dam breaking, pouring his soul into the empty spaces Garrett had left behind. I cried out, not in agony, but in a strange, overwhelming relief. The dust wolf inside me, the one they said was useless, suddenly roared. She wasn't small. She wasn't weak. She was a silver-furred ghost that had been starving for the right mate to call her awake. When Silas finally pulled back, I was gasping, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the connection. I looked down at my shoulder. There, etched into my skin, was the mark of the Alpha King, a stylized wing of a raven entwined with a crown. It glowed with a faint, silvery light before fading into a permanent, dark brand. Silas looked at the mark with a look of pure, predatory satisfaction. He ran his thumb over the bruised skin, his touch now incredibly gentle. It's done, he whispered. You are the High Luna of the Shadow Wing, my queen. As if the moon itself were responding to his words, a sudden, piercing howl echoed through the citadel. Then another, and another. Outside the window, the thousands of warriors who had knelt in the hall were now howling to the sky, celebrating the completion of the bond. But the celebration was short-lived. The heavy oak doors of the chamber burst open. Marcus, the king's lead commander, a man with a face like scarred iron, stood there, his chest heaving. Sire, Marcus said, his voice tight. The border towers just sent a signal flare. It's not just a skirmish. Garrett Stone didn't go back to the village. He met with the Northern Council's vanguard at the Black River. They brought the Silver Slayers. Silas's face instantly transformed. The lover vanished, replaced by the King of Scars. He stood up, his muscles coiling with a lethal tension. The Silver Slayers? The Council's elite executioners. They're claiming the theft of an Omega is a breach of the Great Treaty, Marcus explained. They aren't just here for the girl, sire. They're using this as an excuse to invade the Deadlands. They're 10 miles out and moving fast. I stood up, my legs feeling stronger than they ever had. The mark on my neck was pulsing, feeding me Silas's resolve. Garrett isn't just trying to get me back, I said, my voice cold. He wants to destroy you to prove his worth to the Council. He's sacrificed the whole pack for his own promotion. Silas turned to me, his golden eyes flashing.
He won't get the chance.
Marcus, sound the war drums. I want every warrior on the ramparts. If they want a war over theft, I'll give them a massacre. Wait, I said, stepping forward. I felt my wolf pacing in my mind, her eyes glowing silver. They think I'm a weak Omega. They think I'm property that needs to be retrieved. If you just attack them, the council will call you a tyrant. Let me go to the front." Silas growled, a sharp, protective sound. "Absolutely not. I didn't mark you just to watch you walk into a vanguard of Silver Slayers." "I'm not walking into a trap, Silas," I said, my voice vibrating with a power I didn't know I possessed. "I am the High Luna. Garrett needs to see that the girl he rejected doesn't exist anymore. If he sees me standing at the head of your army, his men will realize they are fighting for a lie. He's told them I was kidnapped. Let them see the truth." Silas stared at me for a long moment. He saw the fire in my eyes, the silver glow beneath my skin. He saw that I wasn't the girl from the northern woods anymore. He stepped closer, cupping my face in his large hands. "You are a dangerous woman, Maya Vance," he whispered, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I learned from the best," I replied. "Fine," Silas said, turning to Marcus. "Ready my armor. And find the queen a suit of shadow steel. If we're going to war, we're going to do it in style." As the war drums began to thrum, a low, rhythmic beat that shook the very foundation of the fortress, I looked out toward the north. The storm was coming, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the wind. I was the storm. The armor felt surprisingly light for something forged from the fabled shadow steel. It was dark, nearly black, with a shifting iridescence that looked like oil on water. As the female blacksmith fastened the greaves to my legs, I caught my reflection in a polished shield. I didn't see the hollow-cheeked girl who had scrubbed the ironclaw floors. I saw a warrior. The mark on my neck was a dark, elegant contrast against the dark metal, pulsing with a steady, warm light that reminded me Silas was with me, even though he was currently in the war room. The air in the citadel was electric. The silence of the shadow wing had been replaced by the rhythmic clanking of steel and the low, guttural chants of warriors preparing for blood. Outside, the war drums continued their relentless thrum, a heartbeat for the monster waking up within the mountain. I walked toward the great gate, my boots clicking sharply against the stone. Silas was there, mounted on a massive black horse that looked like it had been sired by night itself. He wore a suit of heavy plate armor, his cape billowing behind him like a storm cloud. When he saw me, his golden eyes flared with such heat that I felt my own wolf stir in response. "You look like a goddess of war, Maya," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate rumble. He reached down, offering me his hand. I took it, and he pulled me up onto the horse behind him. I wrapped my arms around his waist, my cheek pressed against the cold steel of his backplate. The power radiating from him was staggering. It was the combined strength of 1,000 years of Alpha Kings. "Stay close to me," he commanded as the gates began to rise. "The Silver Slayers use poison blades. One scratch can paralyze a wolf, but they have to get past me first." "They won't get past us," I corrected him. We rode out of the citadel, followed by a sea of shadow wing warriors. We didn't march like the ironclaw, shouting and posturing. We moved like a shadow creeping across the land, silent, inexorable, and terrifying. We reached the Black River as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. On the opposite bank, the northern vanguard was already assembled. There were hundreds of them, their silver armor glinting mockingly in the twilight. In the center of their line stood Garrett, flanked by 6 men in hooded white cloaks, the Silver Slayers. As we approached the riverbank, Silas pulled the horse to a halt. The Shadow Wing army fanned out behind us, a wall of dark steel that made the northern force look small by comparison. "Vane!" Garrett's voice carried across the water, tight with a mixture of arrogance and nerves. "You've crossed the line. The council has authorized a full reclamation. Hand over the Omega and surrender the deadlands, or we will cleanse this valley." Silas didn't answer. He looked at me and nodded. I slid off the back of the horse and walked toward the edge of the water. I didn't stop until I was standing on a flat rock that jutted out over the rushing river. I raised my hand, and the shadow wing drums stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. "Garrett," I shouted, my voice amplified by the power of the Alpha King's mark. "Look at me." On the other side, I saw Garrett stiffen. He squinted through the gloom, his eyes widening as he recognized me.
Maya?
"What have they done to you? You're wearing their rags. You've been brainwashed." "I have been awakened," I countered. I reached up and pulled aside the collar of my armor, exposing the glowing mark of the Alpha King for everyone to see. "I am not a prisoner. I am the High Luna of the Shadow Wing. I have been claimed by the true king, while you were busy playing politics with a woman you don't even love." A shocked murmur rippled through the northern ranks. The common soldiers looked at one another, their grip on their spears loosening. They had been told I was a victim, a kidnapped girl. Seeing me stand there, draped in shadow steel and bearing the king's mark, shattered the lie Garrett had built. "She's lying," Garrett screamed, sensing his control slipping. "It's an illusion. Slayers, take her. Bring her to me." The 6 hooded figures didn't hesitate. They moved with unnatural speed, blurring across the frozen surface of the river like ghosts. They didn't use bridges. They ran atop the ice, their silver longswords drawn and glowing with a sickly green light. "Maya back," Silas roared, leaping from his horse, his own massive black blade clearing its scabbard with a sound like a thunderclap. But I didn't move back. For the first time, I felt the silver wolf inside me move from the back of my mind to the front. She didn't just want to watch. She wanted to hunt. The first Silver Slayer reached the rock, his blade whistling toward my neck. I didn't flinch. I felt a surge of cold, brilliant energy erupt from the mark on my neck. My vision shifted, sharpening until I could see the individual flakes of frost on the Slayer's cloak. I ducked beneath the swing, my movements fluid and fast, faster than any Omega should ever be. I grabbed the Slayer's wrist, and a jolt of silver fire traveled from my hand into his arm. He let out a choked scream as his silver armor began to melt, the metal turning to liquid under the heat of my power. Silas was beside me a second later, his blade shearing through the second Slayer with a single, brutal arc. The other 4 closed in, but they were no longer fighting an Omega and a King. They were fighting a pair of mated alphas whose souls were perfectly in sync. Every time Silas moved, I moved to cover his blind spot. Every time I struck, he was there to finish the blow. It was a dance of death, fueled by a year of suppressed rage and a lifetime of hidden power. Within minutes, the 6 elite executioners lay scattered across the riverbank, their hooded cloaks stained red. I stood over the last one, my chest heaving, a faint silver mist rising from my skin. I looked across the river at Garrett. He was trembling now, his face pale with a terror he couldn't hide. "Is this your reclamation, Garrett?" I asked, my voice echoing like a bell. "Is this the strength of the North?" "You're a monster," Garrett whispered, his voice cracking. "No," Silas said, stepping up behind me and wrapping an arm around my waist, his bloody sword pointed directly at Garrett's throat. "She is a queen, and you just sent your best men to die for a grudge. Your soldiers are watching, Garrett. They see that you are a coward who hides behind others." The northern soldiers began to back away. Some even dropped their weapons, turning and fleeing into the dark woods. They didn't want to die for a man who had lied to them. Garrett looked around, realizing he was suddenly very alone. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of the boy I used to pick berries with. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a desperate, ugly venom. "I'll kill you," he hissed. "I'll go to the council. I'll bring 1,000 men." "You'll go nowhere," a new voice boomed. From the woods behind the northern line, a dozen massive wolves emerged, shifting into men as they reached the light. At their head was a man with white hair and a face like a mountain, the High Alpha of the Northern Council, Garrett's own superior. Garrett Stone, the High Alpha said, his voice heavy with disappointment. You have brought shame upon the North. You lied to the Council about the nature of the bond. You used our elite guard for a personal vendetta. Alpha, I can explain. Garrett started, but the High Alpha raised a hand. Silence. The Shadow Wing have sent us the memories of the night of the Red Moon through the Mind Link. We have seen your rejection. We have seen your cruelty. By the laws of the North, you are stripped of your rank. You are exiled. Garrett fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the stones. No, please. The High Alpha ignored him. He looked across the river at Silas and me. He bowed his head deeply. Alpha King. High Luna. The North offers its deepest apologies. There will be no war. We leave Garrett Stone to the mercy of the deadlands. He is no longer one of ours. The northern party retreated, leaving Garrett alone on the riverbank. He looked like a broken toy, huddled in the snow. Silas looked down at him, then at me. Do you want him dead, Maya? I will end it now if you wish. I looked at the man who had been my world, and I felt nothing.
No cat.
No love. Just a profound sense of closure. No, I said, turning my back on Garrett. Let him live. Let him wander the woods as a nameless, rejected wolf. That is a far worse fate for a man like him than a quick death. Silas sheathed his sword and pulled me into his arms, his heart beating strong against mine. The storm is over, my heart. No, I said, looking up at the citadel, where the lights were beginning to twinkle like stars. Our life is just beginning. The victory at the Black River was not the end. It was a transformation. As we rode back to the citadel, the atmosphere was no longer thick with the stench of impending slaughter. Instead, it was filled with a reverence that made my skin prickle. The Shadow Wing warriors didn't just step aside for Silas anymore. They stepped aside for us. When we entered the great hall, the warmth of the massive hearths rushed to meet us. Silas remained by my side, his hand never leaving mine. He led me not to the guest quarters, but to the high dais. The North has retreated, Silas announced to the gathered assembly, his voice echoing off the obsidian pillars. But let it be known, we did not win because of their mercy. We won because our Luna stood where others would have fled. She faced the Silver Slayers and didn't blink. From this day forward, her word is my word. Her blood is our blood. A roar of approval went up, a sound so loud it felt like it could shake the stars from the sky. But as the celebration began, Silas leaned in close, his golden eyes searching for mine. You're shaking, Maya, he whispered. It's just the adrenaline, I lied. The truth was, the silver fire I had felt at the riverbank was still humming under my skin. It felt like a restless tide, rising and falling with every breath. My wolf wasn't just awake. She was hungry for a purpose I didn't yet understand. Come, Silas said, sensing my unease. The feast can wait for the others.
You need rest.
He led me up the winding stone stairs to the royal suite. Once the heavy doors were shut, the silence of the room felt like a physical relief. Silas began to unbuckle the straps of my shadow steel armor, his movements methodical and gentle. What happened at the river, Silas? I asked, looking at my hands. When I touched that slayer, his armor melted. Omegas don't do that. Even alphas don't usually do that. Silas paused, his hands resting on my shoulders. He turned me around to face him. The Ironclaw told you that you were an Omega because your bloodline had faded. They were wrong. Your bloodline didn't fade, Maya. It went dormant. They didn't know how to trigger it because they only understand brute strength. Trigger what? The silver blood, Silas said, his expression grave. Centuries ago, there were wolves who could channel the moon's light directly into physical heat. They were the protectors of the packs, the ones who hunted the things that live in the deep dark. But the gift is only triggered by a moment of absolute betrayal followed by a true, fated claim. He ran a thumb over the mark on my neck. Garrett's rejection broke the seal. My claim gave it a focus. You aren't just Luna, Maya. You are a sun wolf. The first in 300 years. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head spinning. A sun wolf? I was the girl who cleaned the latrines, Silas. I was the girl who was told she wasn't worth a scrap of meat. And now you are the woman who could burn this fortress to the ground if you chose, Silas said, kneeling between my knees, so we were eye to eye. The power scares you because it's new. But you have a king who has spent a lifetime mastering the dark. Let me help you master the light. He pulled me into a kiss, not a soft one, but one that tasted of possession and promise. In that moment, the silver fire in my veins calmed, settling into a warm, steady glow. The next few days were a blur of lessons and transition. While Silas managed the border defenses, ensuring the Northern Council kept their word, I was thrust into the life of a queen. I met with the healers, the elders, and the families of the Shadow Wing. I found that this pack was built differently. In the Ironclaw, the weak were bullied. In the Shadow Wing, the weak were shielded. It was a pack of survivors, many of whom had been outcasts or refugees from other territories. They saw me as one of their own who had finally come home. However, not everyone was pleased. On the fourth evening, as I walked through the moonlit gardens, I was approached by a group of high-ranking she-wolves. At their center was Vesper, a warrior woman with eyes like flint and a reputation for being the deadliest scout in the territory. Luna, Vesper said, though the title sounded like a challenge. Vesper, I acknowledged, keeping my voice steady. The patrols reported your success in the Eastern Pass. Well done. The patrols do their job because they fear the king, Vesper said, stepping closer. But the king is distracted. He's infatuated with a girl who has silver blood but a northern heart. Tell me, Maya, when the Ironclaw eventually comes back with an army instead of a small vanguard, will you be able to pull the trigger? Or will you see the faces of your old friends and freeze? The women behind her whispered. I felt the heat rising in my chest, the silver fire responding to the disrespect. I have no friends in the north, Vesper, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I saw my friends laugh while I stood barefoot in the snow. I saw my mate throw me away like trash. If they come back, I won't just pull the trigger. I will be the one leading the charge. Vesper smirked, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger. Words are easy, but the Shadow Wing is a pack of scars. We don't follow anyone who hasn't earned theirs. Then let's earn them, I said, stepping into her space. The air between us began to shimmer with heat. Trial by combat. Tomorrow at dawn. If I win, you and your circle give me your absolute loyalty. If you win, I will step down and return to the status of a commoner. Vesper's eyes widened. She hadn't expected the weak Omega to throw down a gauntlet. The king won't allow it. The king doesn't rule my honor, I snapped.
Ida. Dawn.
Don't be late. As I walked away, I felt Silas's presence in the shadows. He stepped out from behind a willow tree, his arms crossed over his chest. You're picking fights with my best scouts now? He asked, though there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. I'm earning my place, Silas, I said, stopping in front of him. I can't be a queen if they think I'm just your favorite pet. Silas reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Vesper is fast. She's mean. And she won't hold back, because you're my mate. Good, I said, leaning into his touch. I don't want her to. I want her to see exactly what a sun wolf can do. Silas chuckled, a dark, rich sound. Then I suppose I should go sharpen your practice blades. But tonight. He pulled me against him, his hands sliding down to grip my waist. Tonight, forget the scouts and the fire. Just be mine. As he lifted me into his arms, I realized that the fear was gone. The rejection had been the death of Maya the Omega, but in her place, something far more dangerous and far more loved, had been born. The dawn mist clung to the training pits like a damp shroud. It was the kind of cold that reminded me of the night I was rejected, but this time I didn't shiver. The silver fire in my blood acted as an internal furnace, keeping the frost at bay. The entire pack had gathered. They lined the stone tiers of the pit, a sea of dark cloaks and expectant faces. Silas sat on the high bench, his expression unreadable, his jaw set like granite. He hadn't tried to stop me, but I could feel his concern through the bond, a low, humming anxiety that he was trying to suppress for my sake. Vesper stood opposite me. She had stripped down to a leather vest and trousers, her arms a map of jagged white scars. She spun a pair of training daggers with terrifying proficiency. "Last chance to back down, Little North Star," Vesper called out, her voice echoing. "I've spent 20 years killing things that were much bigger than you. Then today is the day you learn that size isn't everything," I replied, sliding into a crouch. I didn't have daggers. I didn't need them. The horn sounded. Vesper moved like a blur of gray light. She was faster than any warrior I had seen in the north. Before I could even draw a breath, she was in my space, her blade whistling toward my ribs. I twisted, the edge of the blade catching the leather of my tunic, but I managed to roll away. The crowd roared. Vesper didn't give me time to recover. She was a whirlwind of strikes, slash, kick, elbow. I was on the defensive, barely staying ahead of her. My wolf was pacing in the back of my mind, snapping at the air, frustrated by my restraint. "Use the fire," the wolf whispered. "Burn her." "No," I hissed under my breath. "I have to win as a warrior, not just a monster." Vesper landed a kick to my midsection that sent me sprawling into the dirt. I tasted copper as my lips split. She stood over me, her daggers crossed. "You have the king's mark, but you have an Omega's heart. You're too soft, Maya." She lunged for the final blow. In that split second, I stopped thinking. I reached out and grabbed the sand at my feet. As she descended, I threw the grit upward, but I didn't just throw it. I channeled a burst of heat into the air. The sand turned to glowing glass midair, creating a blinding flash of white light. Vesper cried out, shielding her eyes. I didn't waste the opening. I swept her legs out from under her and pinned her to the ground, my forearm pressed against her throat. I didn't use a knife. I let the silver light gather in my palm, holding it an inch from her face. The heat was so intense it began to singe the ends of her hair. "Do you want to see what happens when an Omega heart catches fire?" I whispered, my voice vibrating with power. Vesper stared into my eyes, which I knew were glowing a terrifying, brilliant silver. She saw the raw, unchecked power of the Sunwolf, a power that could turn her to ash in a heartbeat. But she also saw that I was holding it back. I was in control. The silence in the pit was deafening. Slowly, Vesper let go of her daggers. "I yield," she choked out. I extinguished the light and stood up, offering her my hand. She looked at it for a long moment, then took it, allowing me to pull her to her feet. She didn't look angry. She looked stunned. Vesper turned to the crowd, raising my hand high. "Luna has the fire. She is shadowing." The roar that followed was different from the one at the river. This wasn't a roar for the king's mate. It was a roar for their queen. I looked up at Silas. He was standing now, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. The bond between us flared, a surge of pure, golden pride that made my knees weak. That night, the victory feast was in full swing, but Silas and I were in the quiet of the royal balcony. The moon was full, a giant silver coin hanging over the mountains. "You handled Vesper well," Silas said, stepping up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "Most would have burned her just to prove a point. You showed mercy. That's what a true queen does." "I don't want to be feared by my own people, Silas," I said, leaning back into his warmth. "I've had enough of that." He kissed the top of my head. "You are the light to my shadow, Maya." For the first time in a century, the citadel feels like a home instead of a fortress. But it's not over, is it? I asked, looking toward the dark horizon. Garrett is still out there. And the Northern Council, they may have retreated, but they won't forget the humiliation. Let them come, Silas whispered, his grip tightening protectively.
We are ready.
And tomorrow, we begin the final phase of the transition. The marking was just the beginning. The coronation is next. We will unify the Shadow Wing under one crown. One crown, I repeated, feeling the weight of the destiny I had once run from. As we stood there, watching the stars, I realized I wasn't just a girl from a disgraced bloodline anymore. I was a sun wolf, a queen, and the mate of the most powerful man in the world. The North had tried to bury me. They didn't realize I was a seed. The air in the great hall was thick with the scent of pine, expensive oils, and the underlying musk of 1,000 wolves. This was the day. The day the invisible girl from the North would formally become the High Luna of the greatest pack in the world. The coronation was a sacred rite, one that hadn't been performed in the Shadow Wing for generations. Silas had been a king without a queen, a shadow without a light. Today, that void was being filled. I stood in the antechamber, my heart thumping against my ribs like a caged bird. I wore a gown of molten silver that seemed to glow from within, reflecting the fire that lived in my blood. A heavy cloak of raven black fur hung from my shoulders, held in place by 2 obsidian brooches shaped like wings. You look like a dream the North was too small to have, a voice said. I turned to see Silas standing in the doorway. He looked magnificent in his royal regalia, his crown of dark iron and silver sitting low on his brow. He walked toward me, his golden eyes filled with an emotion so raw it made my breath hitch. Are you ready, Maya? He asked, taking my hands. Once we take that walk, there is no more Maya Vance. You will be the mother of the Shadow Wing. Every joy and every sorrow of this pack will be yours to carry. I've carried the weight of a pack that hated me for 20 years, Silas, I said, a small, confident smile playing on my lips. Carrying a pack that loves me will be a privilege. The heavy drums began to beat, the rhythm of the Shadow Wing. The door swung open, and we stepped out into the hall. The walk felt like it lasted a lifetime. Thousands of warriors, scouts, and families stood in perfect formation. As we passed, they didn't just bow. They touched their hands to their hearts, a gesture of deep, spiritual loyalty. I saw Vesper in the front row, her face set in a look of grim, proud respect. We reached the dais. Silas stepped onto the high platform, but he didn't sit. He turned and reached for me, pulling me up to stand beside him as an equal. The elder, a man so old his skin looked like parchment, stepped forward with a bowl of sacred water and a crown of silver-spun thorns and roses. Silas Vane, Alpha King, the elder's voice rasped. Do you take this woman to be the soul of your pack? To protect her with your blood and honor her with your life? I do, Silas said, his voice a thunderous vow that shook the very air. Maya, High Luna, the elder turned to me. Do you take this man and this pack? To be their light in the dark and their fire in the cold? I do, I replied, my voice clear and steady. The elder dipped his fingers into the water and traced a line across my brow. Then, he placed the silver crown upon my head. I present to you, Maya Vane, High Luna of the Shadow Wing. The hall erupted. The sound was deafening, a mixture of cheers and the deep, resonant howling of wolves. In that moment, the last lingering ghost of the ironclaw vanished. I wasn't an Omega. I wasn't a failure. I was home. The snow fell softly over the northern territory, but the cold no longer had the power to bite. A year had passed since the coronation. The Black River was no longer a border of war, but a line of peace. The Ironclaw had seen a change in leadership after the council fully investigated the corruption of the Stone family. I stood on the balcony of the citadel, my hand resting on the slight swell of my stomach. Our child, the first of a new generation of sunwolves, would be born in the spring. A shadow fell over me, and the familiar, comforting scent of rain and steel filled my senses. Silas wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands joining mine over our unborn child. "Thinking about the past?" he whispered, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Just a little," I admitted. "I heard a rumor from the Border Scouts today." "About Garrett?" Silas asked, his voice tightening slightly. "They saw a wolf wandering the outskirts of the old village. A lone wolf, mangy and broken. He doesn't howl. He just watches the lights of the pack from a distance, never allowed to join. They say he looks like a man who is searching for something he threw away and can never find again." Silas turned me in his arms, his golden eyes soft. "He chose his path, Maya. He chose power over fate. And in doing so, he gave me the greatest gift I have ever received." He leaned down, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that tasted of forever. I had been rejected. I had been humiliated. I had been broken. But as I looked at the man who had claimed me and the kingdom that had embraced me, I knew the truth. The rejection wasn't my end. It was the moment I finally woke up. Thank you so much for following Maya's journey from the frozen woods of the north to the throne of the Shadow Wing. I want to know your thoughts. What part of the story did you find most intriguing? Was it the moment Garrett's bond shattered in the square? Or did you love seeing Maya finally unleash her silver fire against the Slayers at the river? How did you feel when the High Alpha of the North finally exiled Garrett for his lies? Comment your favorite moment below. I love reading your reactions and theories. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Your subscription is a huge support and truly means the world to me, especially as this channel is still young and trying to grow. Every like and comment helps us bring more of these epic paranormal romances to life. See you in the next story, where the shadows have even more secrets to tell.